Hey there, and welcome to the Fiscal Sponsorship Frequently Asked Questions video. Today, we're talking about the Fiscal Sponsorship Grant Agreement, which is the backbone of our fiscal sponsorship program, as well as the Lobbying Agreement and Hybrid Addendum. All of our fiscally sponsored projects agree to the Fiscal Sponsorship Agreement when they're approved for fiscal sponsorship. In this video, we'll give you answers to questions that may come up when reviewing the updated agreement, as well as its additional documents, and determine who should be signing them. Before we dive in, please remember that only the official contractual language is binding. Fractured Atlas staff, like myself, are unable to provide official legal advice. This video and any other supplemental materials that we create is simply to ease your understanding. For any specific legal questions, please reach out to an attorney. All right, let's get started. First question, what is the Fiscal Sponsorship Grant Agreement? The Fiscal Sponsorship Grant Agreement is the backbone of our fiscal sponsorship program. It solidifies our working relationship between you, the project, and is a contractual agreement between Fractured Atlas, also known as the grantor, and the legal entity that is being fiscally sponsored, also known as the grantee. A legal entity is an individual, company, or organization that has legal rights and obligations. A legal entity can include an individual or sole proprietor, LLC, corporation, partnership, and more. A legal entity can enter into contracts, sue and be sued, own property, pay taxes, and more. When you apply for fiscal sponsorship, you'll be able to read through the entire fiscal sponsorship agreement before submitting your application. We strongly recommend reading through the entire thing and asking any questions that you have before submitting your application. Remember, this is a legally binding contract that governs things like our administrative fee, the donation process, our annual report requirements, our fund release process, our grant application and grant process, and what can happen if you or Fractured Atlas violates the terms of the agreement. I read the agreement. What do I do next? Once you've read the agreement, if you are the signatory of the legal entity on file, you can sign the agreement. Or if the signatory is someone else, you can send them an invitation to sign the agreement and then submit the application. Wait a minute, what's a signatory? A signatory is the individual who is able to sign contracts on behalf of the legal entity. For example, the authorized signatory could be you if the legal entity on file is your name and social security number. Or it could be your collaborator if the legal entity on file is an LLC that they own. Or it could be your organization's board member if the legal entity on file is a corporation. If you're unsure who the signatory is, ask yourself, who is authorized to sign contracts on behalf of the legal entity that I've listed here? For more information on how to sign the Fiscal Sponsorship Agreement or designate a signatory, check out the link in the article below. Next question. I'm planning on using fiscal sponsorship to raise money for lobbying activities. What do I need to know? If you plan on using Fractured Atlas's fiscal sponsorship program to raise money for lobbying activities, you'll need to sign the lobbying agreement. You'll indicate whether you plan on raising money for lobbying activities in your fiscal sponsorship application and have the opportunity to read the agreement before you submit the application. The lobbying agreement details how projects are able to use their fiscal sponsorship to raise money for and engage in lobbying activities. Please note, lobbying is something that the IRS restricts and closely monitors for 501c3s, the type of legal entity Fractured Atlas is. That's why we have to provide additional oversight and restrictions on how projects engage in lobbying. If you plan on signing the lobbying agreement, be sure to read through it carefully. Some highlights of the lobbying agreement include indicating whether you plan on engaging in grassroots or direct lobbying. We are unable to support projects that are interested in engaging in both types of lobbying. The lobbying agreement is only active for the calendar year in which it's signed. You'll be required to re-sign the lobbying agreement each year that you plan to use funds raised through Fractured Atlas to engage in lobbying activities. There is a per project, per year cap on the funds that are raised through Fractured Atlas's fiscal sponsorship program that can be put towards lobbying activities. And lastly, when you submit a fund release request, you'll be required to indicate how much of the funds will be used towards lobbying activities. And if some of the funds are put towards lobbying activities, you'll be required to submit fund release documentation. I'm planning on pursuing investors while fiscally sponsored by Fractured Atlas. What do I need to know? If you plan to pursue investors while being fiscally sponsored by Fractured Atlas, you'll need to sign our hybrid addendum. Yet again, you will indicate on the fiscal sponsorship application you plan to pursue investors, and you'll have the opportunity to review the addendum before submitting. Our program makes a distinction between donors and investors. A donor is someone who contributes out of the kindness of their heart because they want to assist the project and don't expect anything in return for their support. An investor is someone who contributes with the expectation that they'll receive a share of the profits from your project. Some highlights of the hybrid addendum include, while being fiscally sponsored, Fractured Atlas needs to review and sign off on any for-profit agreements you enter into. We require that you keep separate bank accounts to prevent funds raised through our nonprofit status from commingling with for-profit funds. And lastly, nonprofit donors cannot be for-profit investors and vice versa. Final question. I got an email reminder to fill out my annual report. How do I do this within the rollout of the new fiscal sponsorship grant agreement? If you received a notification to file your annual report and you have not filed it before the launch date of the new fiscal sponsorship grant agreement, you'll need to review the agreement and act upon it before you can access your annual report. If you filed your annual report before the launch date, then you're all set. Thanks for getting it in. And that's a wrap, folks. We hope that this video has answered your questions about the fiscal sponsorship agreement, lobbying agreement, and hybrid addendum. As a friendly reminder, this video was meant to be informational and does not constitute as legal advice. Only the official contractual language is binding. For specific legal questions, we recommend reaching out to an attorney. Thanks so much for watching, and feel free to reach out to us if you have any other questions.